Okay, cool. So, good evening to you all. Welcome. Quick question. Who realizes the Star Wars theme coming up? A few of you. The Star Wars theme? Rise of the Frontend or JAMstack story? A Star Wars story? So, in light of this, I prepared this, which should have sound. Wait. We'll see. Maybe I need to start the video, but I did adjust the sound, I think, but alright, so you just watch that.
No Space Jam, why Star Wars? No Space Jam.
I did that talk before, but I use that. It's not long, I promise. That's not my talk, if that's what you're wondering. Okay, I won't let this play. There's a Death Star at the end, but we're not going to get to that. Right. We'll just skip the video from the recording. Okay, so I work as a developer evangelist at this wonderful company called Cloudinary, where you are all at the moment. I also happen to be a GDE, so Google Developer Expert in web technologies. If you are interested in that program, then we can talk about that, and I can, of course, recommend you for that program as well. And that freaky photo tells you that I'm a part-time Sith Lord. Not really, I'm just kidding. So, who heard this phrase before? Fresh body, fit mind. Some of you did. Okay, so it means that you need to sometimes do a little bit of exercise in order to be able to concentrate on various things, like the thing that I'm going to talk about. So in light of this, what we're going to start with is a little bit of an exercise. So I would like you to stand up for a minute. There's a lot of stuff that you need to process today, so we need to get those brain juices flowing. So what I'm going to do is show you the actual exercise, okay? It's going to be very simple, no jumping whatsoever. So I'm going to show you my back, I'm sorry. So you need to raise up your hand like that.
With the phone?
Not with the phone, I'm just ignore the phone. Okay? And start to clap. And you can see this. Thank you very much for the standing ovation. Okay, so we had Star Wars movies, we had standing ovations. That's good, but now let's talk about something more serious. So the title of this talk is JAMstack Story, the Rise of the Frontend Developer. So who is a Frontend developer? I happened to found this article, which I linked to on the this newspaper called The Guardian from 2009, and they had to say this about the front-end developer. Okay, so the last sentence says, front-end is not just a pretty face, it's the friendly, forward-looking interface of web development. So with that, and throughout the article, what they're explaining is that a front-end developer deals with what the user is going to see, like all the pretty details of web applications, right? So if we compare that to a job description that I found today, so I actually looked this up about a week ago, it says, you must be highly competent and experienced with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this is a job description of a front-end developer position somewhere in the UK. Okay, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's classic, right? There's no real surprises there. Then they say you must have, and they list a couple of experiences and what communication skills you should have, project experience, etc., etc. That's great. And then comes the interesting bit, where they say, oh, by the way, when they say highly desirable skills, it pretty much means you should have it. Otherwise, you're not really qualified for a job. So, as a front-end developer, you should know PHP, you should know SQL, you should know how to integrate third-party APIs, you should know web security, web hosting, DNS configuration, CDN, SSL, and by the way, Git. I don't even know what Twig is, by the way. I forgot to look it up, but these are the things that they say a front-end developer should know today. Is this really a front-end developer? If you compare that to the article from 2009, it's very much different, right? In 2009, they were talking about pretty much this first requirement, right? Which was HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You know that you are a front-end developer. Today, you are a front-end developer if you know PHP SQL, excuse me, security, and other things, right? That's not really the right thing to expect from people. So who is really a front-end developer, right? So if you put all of this together, a front-end developer is someone who knows about front-end technologies, all the frameworks and the libraries that are out there today. Apparently, on top of that, they should also know about backend technologies and some DevOps-related tasks, right? So maybe be familiar with a backend language, PHP, Node.js, or something. They should apparently also understand security, deployment workflows, and other things. And it's just a lot that they need to do. But the question is, can they do it? Or if they can do it, how can they do that? So let's think about a simple example. So what if you have a front-end developer at a company who would like to build a very simple thing, a contact form, okay? As a front-end developer, they should be able to create the actual components. So the forms, the input fields, the buttons, the CSS, the styling of the actual form, okay? And then they can save their changes to GitHub, right? They can commit those changes to Git. Now, backend code, probably there's another team who writes the backend code, so someone uses PHP or Node.js to actually process the information that comes from the form itself. So they can't really deal with that. Can they configure the backend, which then is going to execute the backend code? Not really. Can they touch load balancing? Not really. Can they manage the CDNs? Not really. Probably they're not allowed to do that, and they're not allowed to deploy this entire thing, right? So that means that the rest of these tasks, which are outside their control, is going to have to wait, okay? Because they are dependent on some other team members or some other people at the company who are going to be doing that. But what if we give power to the front-end developers? And that's when this happens, right? So they get unlimited power, okay? There's going to be tons of Star Wars references, okay, don't worry. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to talk about this thing called the JAMstack, and I'm going to prove to you, hopefully, by the way, quick show of hands who heard about the JAMstack before? A few of you, okay? So I'm going to prove to you that with the JAMstack, front-end developers get a lot of power because they can do a lot of things which, traditionally speaking, is not really part of their role, okay? And they can do it in a very easy and straightforward way. So what is the JAMstack? So JAMstack is really short for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. Okay, which is just 3 words, but there's a lot more to the JAMstack itself. And I like this quote from Phil Hawksworth, who works at Netlify, who summed up the JAMstack with this phrase. So the JAMstack is a modern architecture that allows us to create fast, secure sites, fast, secure, and dynamic apps with JavaScript, APIs, and pre-rendered markup served without web servers. Okay, there's a lot of information in this sentence. The fact that we can create something that's fast, that's secure, that's dynamic. We use JavaScript, we use APIs, we do pre-rendering, and we do all of this without web servers. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on these individual bits and pieces from this quote. Starting with web servers. So when Phil had to say that we can serve all of that without a web server, what he kind of should have said is that we can serve that content without what is called an origin server. Okay, so what is an origin server? An origin server is essentially a computer that has an application running on it, which is capable of accepting your requests and providing a response, i.e. a web server, Apache, or whatever else web server, right? So there's some sort of a server, requests come in, and they send a response. Okay, so that is an origin server. So in a classic world, hopefully everyone heard about the JAMstack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and then traditionally speaking, PHP, but you could replace that with Python, Perl, whatever. So the way that worked was you had some PHP code intermixed with HTML. Let's forget whether that's a good thing or not. But in that sort of template, you had the opportunity to go out to a database, run some queries, And then the end result was, when the users opened your page, is that you got the data that got processed from the database via PHP into your browser, okay? And all of that is enabled by an Apache server that's running. So in this example, let's not talk about it actually, but hopefully you can read it. You have the PHP code, you have the SQL query, and every time when the users request that page, you see the department list, which is really just a list of departments coming from the database, okay? And the key thing to remember here is that every time when this page is requested, the querying happens at request time, okay? This is very important to remember. So things happen at request time, when the users are requesting the page. Another example, the main stack, right? So MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node. Sometimes Angular is replaced with R for React, so that's the MERN stack, but fundamentally they are the same. So again, you have a server which runs Node.js and Express. So this time Express is your web server. And traditionally speaking, the way you constructed these applications, and this is also what gave birth to single-page application design, is that you have an API of some sort written in Node.js with MongoDB, and you would then go out to that API endpoint in Angular or in your front-end framework. You would create a template, and then the template would generate some HTML, and that's what you would see inside your browser. But again, the key thing to remember here is that what happens here happens at request time. So when I'm requesting that page, Angular looks at the template looks at the component or the service goes to Node, gets the data, and then compiles back everything, or the data runs through this all the time, every time when the user requests the page. So if we don't have an origin server, so in both of these cases we had an origin server, Apache or Express, right, running on a server. If we don't have an origin server, what's the other thing that we can have which is not an origin server? And that is called an edge server. Now, an edge server is basically a set of computers that are distributed globally. And the good thing about this is that every time when you request something from these edge servers, the closest server to your geographical location is going to return you the data. In sort of other words, an edge server, you can think about the edge servers as a CDN, right? So today, we use CDNs for serving up JavaScript and CSS. I'm pretty sure you've all used jQuery or Bootstrap, where you just included a single line of code in your application that said something, Bootstrap, I don't even know, like jQuery.cdn.something, right? So that is using a CDN network. So the question is, if we have servers that are globally available, they are made to do caching. They are really fast, right, because of how they work. Why do we only use it for serving CSS and JavaScript? Why don't we use it for serving the actual web applications that we have? And what JAMstack is doing is exactly that. So with a JAMstack website, what you have is an HTML page or a set of HTML pages placed on edge servers, so they are available to your users globally, and therefore they are going to be served up very, very fast, along with your CSS and JavaScript. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more if it doesn't make sense, because probably you're thinking, how can I put my website, which needs some server-side code maybe and stuff, to a CDN server, which is an edge server that doesn't execute server-side code. So we're going to talk about this in just a moment. Now, what I would like you to realize as well is CDNs are capable of doing things like load balancing, traffic redirection, and they do that automatically, okay? So it's completely transparent to you. You don't need to worry about how to set up load balancing for your servers, because the CDN service provider takes care of that for you automatically. So, in the JAMstack world, and if you read articles about the JAMstack or you had discussions, oftentimes the term static comes up, static site generators or static pages or static hosting. And it's funny because most of the time when we think about static websites, at least under the umbrella of the JAMstack, we don't actually mean static. Right? So the way you make your websites dynamic in the JAMstack is by using third-party APIs. So you leverage a lot of third-party APIs, and we're going to talk about those as well. And there are multiple benefits for this. So think about a very simple scenario. For example, a contact form. So traditionally speaking, building a contact form means you put up your HTML, you have your input boxes, you have a button, and then you have to have some server-side code as well, which is then going to process that form, maybe send an email to the person who filled out the form and another email to you to actually receive that information. Maybe you want to store that in the database. So there are lots of server-side work, and there's lots of connected pieces that need to work together, right? So there is this API provider called FormSpree, okay? The only thing that FormSpree is doing is to provide you with contact forms. And believe it or not, who has heard about FormSpree before? Yes. Okay, so FormSpree, believe it or not, all you need to do is inside the action attribute of your form, you put https://formspree.io/email address. Done, right? Okay, you need to put a few more attributes to your input fields, but they give you a contact form. That's it. You fill it out, you hit send, you get an email with the information that was filled out, okay? FormSpree does one thing. The only thing that they do is provide you with contact forms, right? And there are lots of other such API providers, right? So I have a quick list here. So for payments, you can use Stripe or PayPal. For images, SMS messaging, Twilio, Forms, FormSpree, e-commerce, Snipcart, authentication, Auth0. Like think about how much work you would have to do to create your own authentication system. That's a lot of work, right? Server-side, database, making sure the passwords are stored in an encrypted format and in a secure way, etc., etc. Auth0 is a company that deals with authentication. That's the only thing that they do. And I go back one slide. So the reason why I'm saying this is because, and that's the code that I put there, standing on the shoulders of giants, you are basically leveraging companies that are experts in their own domains, right? They know how to work with authentication. They know how to work with forms. In the same way, how we here at Cloudinary know how to work with images and videos, and that is the only thing that we do. Therefore, we are very good at that. Furthermore, all these API providers are also transparently able to adjust their services behind the scenes. So one good example, say, you see here Snipcart, which is a complete e-commerce solution. And again, all you need to do to use Snipcart is to add a line of JavaScript into your application, configure a few things, and you have a full-blown e-commerce checkout flow ready for you, right? Think about it. You have a website, and you thought 1,000 people per month are going to make a purchase on that website, right? And then you're happy with your performance and everything works. Now Christmas comes, or some holiday comes, and then instead of 1,000 people trying to purchase products, now there are 10,000 people per day trying to purchase products. In a traditional web architecture, this is the point where you sort of start to pull your head out, you try to do mostly the hair out, and you're trying to fix these things, right? You're trying to say, do I need to buy more application servers? Do I need more powerful servers? Do I need more load balancing? Should I put stuff on the CDN? And it just all goes, pear-shaped. When you use one of these, not one of these, but any APIs, the API provider will realize that you have now more requests, and then they're going to give you more power. But that is 100% transparent to you. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes. You don't know how they scale up, how they scale down, how they move traffic. All you know, and all that matters to you, is that the API that you're using is still going to work in a way that you originally planned for. Okay? You had a question.
Yeah, about the forms.
Yes.
Do you write your own forms in FormSpree?
You create an HTML form element with input fields and text areas and everything. You add, I'm forgetting what the attribute for, I think name maybe. I think it's name, right? Yeah. You add name and you say name, this is the phone number, name, this is the whatever, and then the action attribute you put formspree.io/email address and you're done. Really, trust me, that's how it works. It's unbelievable, but it's as simple as it.
These APIs, they're free,
That's free. So most of these companies that you see here, and generally speaking, API providers would have a free tier, right? FormSpree is maybe 50 incoming messages per week, month, I don't know, but that's the limit. Even I think their second tier is like $5 per month, it's not. Yep. Also, please note that you can have custom-built APIs, right? I'm not going to talk about that because I think Vladimir is going to cover most of that. I will show you a very quick example of that, but he's going to talk about that later on.
Is there a place where you can search these kinds of APIs? Like a direct-
I think there's one site which is called serverless something where you can do that. But generally speaking, if you say, I need e-commerce solution, then you would just go for e-commerce APIs and then more than one would come up, right? Or if you do payments, online payment APIs, then Stripe would come up, PayPal would come up, and another 5 probably would come up. So you would just search for what you need. These are just examples, right? There's like a bazillion amount of APIs out there today. So the reason why I'm saying this is because even though what we're going to talk about seem to be static sites, remember there's the JAMstack. The A in the JAMstack is API, so they are encouraging you to make your app dynamic by using these APIs. And the other thing, and hopefully you see this now, is that if you have some API, you don't need a server to execute code, right? Because you're just calling an API, and therefore you can get away just by having almost static HTML pages living on edge servers. Okay. Huh?
You're using someone else's server.
You're using someone else's server, yes. But there's another benefit to that. Sure.
What about the cases where you need to be offline, or you have no internet connection? How does all this work?
In what sense you want to be offline?
You're on your mobile, you're in a bad service area. How will these APIs
You
there on the web?
so you could have progressive web apps where you still provide some functionality for your users, but in all fairness, if you have a user who's offline, and even you have your own server, they won't be able to access it either anyway, right? It doesn't matter, because if you're offline, you can't access your server nor anyone else's server. So there's no
difference.
There's no difference. If you want offline capabilities, it's PWAs, progressive web apps, which give you some functionality offline, but that again is still going to be limited, of course.
There is any solution for database?
Yes, lots. There's, I'm going to show you, so you see this section in headless CMS, I'm going to show you that, and I think you will talk about the database thing as well. Yeah. So there's lots of options. So when you read and research about the JAMstack, you will likely come across these terms. I will very quickly, because I think I have limited time, so I'm very quickly going to go through the first 4, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on 5. So, client-side rendering. Hopefully everyone knows client-side rendering. Single-page applications, JavaScript execution is inside the browser. So your browser is your main execution engine, right? Think about AngularJS and all the other JavaScript frameworks, right? So templating, routing, data fetching, rendering happens inside the browser. That's client-side rendering. Now, the reason why I say this is to compare that with something called server-side rendering. So server-side rendering is different from client-side rendering because when you request a page, the actual content, as opposed to being built in the browser like it would happen with client-side rendering, gets built on the server side. Okay, so the server builds up the HTML, makes the request to the APIs, grabs the data back, fills out all your templates, and then sends back the generated HTML, which now has the data, to the requesting browser. Okay? The reason for this, or why this is good, is search engine optimization, first of all, right? Because the HTML that the browser will see is going to contain all the data that is supposed to be there, as opposed to like the double curly brackets, which are then going to be replaced by the framework of your choice, right? The other thing is that relying on a server to do code execution and data pool is going to be much better by definition, because the server is going to be probably available, would have better network connection, and therefore would be able to always pull the data in a very fast way, as opposed to a browser, which is now depending on the client itself, right? So my computer may generate a site than your computer or your computer, okay?
Isn't this basically what PHP used to do?
Yeah. Pretty much, yes.
When you do server-side rendering, when you have, for example, you have building your HTML, how does that happen on the server side?
So most frameworks have options to switch between client-side or server-side rendering. In React, there's a method, which I can't remember, but there's a method that you can call and then they will do server-side rendering. In Angular, there's Angular Universal, I think, which does server-side rendering, and then the other frameworks would have their own ways of doing that. Okay, we also have pre-rendering. So there's a significant difference here between pre-rendering and everything else that I mentioned, because the previous two ways happened at request time. I request a page, something happens, I see the result of that. Whereas with pre-rendering, the site has been pre-generated for me, and therefore it's been generated at build time as opposed to request time. Okay, so there's a build process that builds up all the HTML pages ahead of time. So when I request the page, there's no processing required. It just shows me the page that it generated before. Okay, so in such cases, there's this thing called hydration, which you may have heard about. If you use the site, and I'm not saying this is in 100% of the cases true, but if you use a site that has a button, and it appears very fast. So all the HTML, you go to a page and boom, it's there. And then there's a button and you want to click it, nothing happens, you keep on clicking it, and at some point in time, it's clickable and some action happens. Okay, so that's likely that it's a pre-rendered site that added hydration. So what does that mean? That means that the HTML that you saw was server generated or pre-generated. It got loaded to the browser really fast, but there was no JavaScript loaded. Okay? What happens with hydration or rehydration is that JavaScript gets executed and it attaches dynamic events to your DOM. And that's why the button, you clicked it but nothing happened, because there was still some JavaScript being hydrated. When that finished, all the event listeners were attached. You click it and now the action can get executed. So really pre-rendering is a mix of server-side rendering and client-side rendering. Okay?
It's like Gatsby or something like that?
Gatsby is this one, static site generator. Static site generators, and I will tell you the difference between the two because I know it's not clear. So static site generators, again, you provided some templates, and again, it generates an HTML file for you for each and every single route that you have specified at build time. Not at request time, not when you request the page, but as part of a build process. Okay? There are a lot of static site generators out there today. There are ones that are based on just pure vanilla JavaScript. There are ones that are built on popular front-end frameworks, and there are ones that are actually based on other languages than JavaScript. Okay, so here's a list. There's, again, more than just, 6. So there's Gatsby, which is based on React. There's Next.js, which is also based on React. There's Nuxt, ViewPress, GridSum. They are based on Vue.js. If you are after just a pure vanilla JavaScript-based static site generator, then there's this thing called Eleventy. If you hate JavaScript, then there's Jekyll, which is based on Ruby. If you hate Ruby, then there's Hugo, which is based on Go. There's also one thing called Nift, which is a C++-based static site generator. So if you hate all of this, then you still have another choice. And here's one more thing that I want you to remember. When I have this slide and when I talk about this, people ask me, but you just said JAMstack is JavaScript, APIs markup, yet you talk about Ruby and Go and C++. So what's that, right? What I want you to realize is that the static site generators are not relevant to the J in the JAMstack. They are relevant to the M, the markup, right? With this, you generate something based on the markup. How you generate the markup, how you build your pages as part of the build process, it doesn't matter whether you use JavaScript or React or Go or C++. It really doesn't matter, okay? The JavaScript in the JAMstack is relevant to the API consumption of your HTML page, of your generated HTML pages. So, pre-rendering static site generator. How do we know what's what? Remember, pre-rendering requires a lot of JavaScript execution because it needs that hydration. So one simple test that you can do to see whether something was pre-rendered or pre-generated or it's using a static site generator is to disable the JavaScript inside your browser. One is going to work, that's the static site generator. The other one may or may not work, partially work, not work at all. That's probably been pre-rendered. So, headless CMS. How many of you, when I say headless CMS, have this image appear in their head? No one? From this point, you will. You're welcome. What is a headless CMS? So you all heard about CMSs, right? Content management systems, WordPress. Classic example. WordPress is a CMS, right? But what makes a CMS a headless CMS? A headless CMS, in other terms, would be a decoupled CMS. What is decoupled? It's decoupled, the presentation layer is decoupled from the data layer. So who here has used WordPress before? Oh, usually I get like, okay. So when you have the presentation, so in WordPress, older versions of WordPress, they're getting a little better. The presentation layer is coupled with the data layer. You get a database, you get an admin interface, and then you get a front-end interface to go with it, onto which you can apply themes. But they go together. There's no way that you can separate the two. A headless CMS is, you have a data layer, they give you maybe an admin interface to manage that data, and that's it. How you consume that data, they don't care. If you want to consume it in a mobile app, you can do it. In any other app, you can do it. And there are two types of headless CMSs out there. There are API-based ones, and there are Git-based ones. Okay? API-based headless CMSs basically expose RESTful API endpoints, which then you can call, and then you can consume the data that comes back. Git-based ones usually work with markdown files, which, will you show markdown? Okay, he will show you how that works. But basically they work on using Git commits and markdown files to manage the content itself, okay? But the key thing to remember is that headless CMSs decouple the presentation layer from the data layer, okay? So you can present your data in any way that you want.
How is it different than a regular document?
You get an admin interface to manage users, content, and other stuff, which then you would have to build on top of your data. If you,
Firebase gives you basically the same.
yeah.
So it's
It does, but Firebase doesn't give you user management and access level management of your users using one instance of your database, for example. At least I don't think they do. I don't think they do. So headless CMSs, examples. Again, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's tons more. Strappy, API-based, they actually allow you to select SQL or NoSQL as a backend, so you can select Postgres, MongoDB. They also have a GraphQL layer. Netlify CMS is a Git-based one, Contentful, Cosmic.js, API-based one, Pernatic, a Git-based headless CMS. But as I said, there's a lot of additional ones available there. So at a very high level, just to summarize what we kind of talked about before I jump into a demo, we have CDN servers, okay? There are lots of CDN providers. I'm going to show you Netlify. He's going to show you Amplify. Netlify, Amplify, two different services. But what matters and what's common is that they have servers around the world. So what happens, your user requests a page, and the page gets returned from a CDN server closest to the user. Another user requests a page, again, wherever that user is, that CDN is going to display the data for them. But how is this JAMstack relevant to the developers? So there's our developer working on some code, and that developer does a git push and a git commit, which we usually do, and that code goes into GitHub. Now, some of these providers, so I'm going to talk about this one, Vladimir is going to talk about that one, so Netlify, Amazon's Amplify, the triangle is Zeit Now, which is again, they are all deployment platforms. So what these deployment platforms can do is that you can integrate them with GitHub, and if they notice that you just did a git push and a git commit, meaning that you just saved something to Git, they can automatically deploy the new version of your site to the global CDN. Okay? Why is this good? Because they invalidate the CDN cache, they do everything for you automatically, and in a matter of seconds or minutes, depends how big your site is, the site is going to be available for your users. Now, there are a lot of additional benefits, and I'm not going to go through all of these. Performance is an obvious one, right? There's no server-side code execution happening, it's just HTML, CSS with API calls, therefore the web application is going to be performed. Cost. If you can find providers where there's a free tier, you can use that, or if you go above that, you still have a very easy way to calculate the costs of a given service. And what's important to notice here is that when I say cost, it's also the cost of the developer's time, because the development workflow is going to be a lot easier. Okay, so when you think about cost, you need to think about the cost of the developer work time as well. Planning, so maintenance, development, deployment, and security. If you think about it and you compare all of this with a classical JAMstack architecture, what is called the attack surface area of a JAMstack site is a lot larger. What is the attack surface area? It's all the moving parts. So there's an application server that's connected to a database server, and there's some other servers in the load balance. So there are lots of places where malicious attacks could happen. Someone could attack your database, the link between the application server and the database, the application server, the load balancer, etc., etc. So this is what I mean, that the attack surface area is big. Now with the JAMstack, you have no server-side code execution. Therefore, by definition, the attack surface area that you have is tinier, right? It's a lot smaller. Deployment, well, I'm going to show that to you why that's also a benefit. So now, going back to this, what if our now empowered front-end developer would like to build a contact form? So we had those first two ticks, right? So we build the front-end component, does a commit to Git. But with the JAMstack, they don't need to write backend code because they just need to call an API, which that they can do because it's relatively simple to do. I'll talk about it later. They don't need to configure any backend. All they need to do is to do a git push and a git commit, and with that, they've also achieved deployment of the changes, right? So the front-end developer can now achieve all of this with ease. And even if we're going to see this, even if they need to write some backend code, maybe a serverless function, it's going to be so simple because they can now use Node.js, which is probably something that they are familiar with just by definition, because that's also a JavaScript-based tool, framework, runtime something, whatever that is. They can still write it. So, I'll sit down for this, but let's do a demo. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
Performance-wise, because if you use multiple APIs and stuff like that, the user sends a request to you, and then you send multiple requests to multiple APIs. So instead of just doing all the requests, handle them in your server and not call multiple APIs, maybe it's a little bit, I don't know, faster or something?
Depends on the nature of the API. There are some APIs that you can call during the build time, so that the page that you build will consume that API, and there's no need to call that API at request time. And at request time, you're still going to, so most of these APIs would embed something inside your code, but then that's going to be just some JavaScript, some CSS, or some HTML that they do. Right now, if you're in a slow connection, yes, that would be an issue. But it's, imagine trying to manage an entire e-commerce solution versus using a service that does that for you. I think that's easier. Anything to add? But
I will show the...
he will show you something related to this. So what I will show you is an application. I'm not going to go through the code. I'm going to give you the link to GitHub later, but I'm going to show this to you here. Is it? Okay, so what I've done, I used Nuxt.js, which is a Vue.js-based static site generator, to create this application. And I'm going to show this application to you, and then we're going to deploy it in about less than 5 minutes, I hope. Okay, so it's building that, and let me actually, while it's doing its stuff, let me show you a headless CMS. Okay, so what I have, and just to save some time, I've deployed this headless CMS to Heroku. This is Strappy. Okay, so I've set up MongoDB, I've set up everything ahead of time. And what you get is, if you go to this deployed headless CMS /admin, then you get an admin interface for this CMS. And as you can see, they allow you to manage the content itself. So this is going to show me at some point in time. So this is Heroku. I'm not paying for it, so it goes to sleep, right? Not that. Content, where is it? Characters, sorry. So this is now, believe it or not, Star Wars characters, okay? So what I have here is data coming from a database, okay? And this is a headless CMS, but this is the admin part of the CMS. It allows me to go in and edit my data. I can update the various pieces, and there's a lot of additional things that Strappy allows me to do. Notice I also have users, so I can add additional users. I can manage their roles. So I have a full-blown content management system available at my disposal. Then what I do is that I go to roles and permissions, and then I say public, and then I can expose public endpoints. Okay, and I have exposed character find and find one, and those are HTTP GET methods. So get/characters is now an exposed endpoint. And that's why if I go to the, what if I do this? Does it? Ooh, fancy. So if I go to /characters on the same domain, what I get back is all the character information that I wanted, right? So this is the headless CMS. This is an API-based headless CMS exposing me the data that I have managed via the admin interface, okay? But that's all what it does. Now, how I consume that data is completely up to me. And inside the, hopefully that's running now. Is it 3,000? And inside my application, what I've done was very simply to build something to consume that data, right? So everything that you see here comes from this particular API. Okay, so there's Finn, Stormtrooper, there's a bio for this character. So if I click on this, then I just get that information in a very nice format. Okay? Now what I want you to notice as well is the fact that if I open a character page, then I get this large image of the character, but inside the character list, notice that there's the focus is on the face of the character. How is that possible? So I'm using Strappy, I'm using Nuxt, but I also integrated another API to my JAMstack application, which happens to be the API, the API of, yes. And now you will see a Clouding demo. But it's going to be cool, I promise. So, just to explain to you what you see there. We have this image, right? So that's an image of this woman. And every time when you, who here used Clouding before, by the way? Nice. Okay. So, when you upload an image to Cloudinary, you get this thing, which is just an access URL. Okay, so something, account name, woman.jpg. That's the name of the file that I've uploaded. Okay, and this file is 1000 by 688 pixels in size, as in pixel size. And the actual size of the image is, let me zoom in on this a bit. 570 kilobytes, okay? Can you read that? Sorry. 570 kilobytes, okay? I find that to be large. Now imagine that we're building an e-commerce store, and now I would have 20 images about one product, 570 kilobytes each, 10 products per page. That's my monthly mobile alarms gone, right? So what can we do about this? So there's a thing that Cloudinary does, which is called, let's do Q_auto. So what I'm doing, let me zoom in. So what I'm doing is just adding something to the URL. Q_auto is short for automatic quality. So what Cloudinary will do is we'll take a look at this image. It's going to analyze that image and remove the pixels and the data from that image without affecting how the image looks like to the human eye. In other words, I'm going to leave it zoomed in like this. I'm going to hit enter. There's no visual deficiencies that I can see, right? It's already loaded, right? That's still the same image. It feels like the same image, but now we are, where it is? Now we are at 50 kilobytes, right? So we went from 570 to 50, just by adding that one thing. We can do a lot better. Wait, this is nothing. Okay, so who here heard about WebP, web picture? A few of you, okay. So for those of you who haven't, there are all these image formats. JPEG, PNG, WebP, etc. So WebP is an image format invented by Google or advocated by Google, and they say if you're using the Google Chrome browser, and if you send us a WebP image, we can optimize that image even further. But then, I don't know, Firefox says, you send me a WebP, I don't know, they don't know how to deal with it, right? So in an ideal world, you would have to have an optimized JPEG for Firefox, WebP served for Chrome, and there's different, JPEG XL for, is it JPEG 2000 for IE? Anyway, so these browsers have different image formats that they can optimize further. What if I would tell you that if you just add F-auto, Cloudinary at the server side will generate an image relevant to the browser where you open the image from, okay? So let's do this. Okay, so that's loaded. We went from 49 to 32 kilobytes now. And the reason that we dropped from 49 to 32 is because if you take a look at the header, even though it's still woman.jpg, the image has been served as a WebP. Why? Because Cloudinary knows I am using Chrome, and it says you're using Chrome, WebP is the most optimized format, let me give you the WebP image. And then I'm going to add 3 more parameters, or a few more. So I'm going to add width 250. This is now reducing the size of the image to be 250. Okay, that means that we are now at 5.3 kilobytes. 570, 5.3. But when you see this image, you're thinking, this is a profile picture, and I don't want just to shrink it. I want to crop a thumbnail, find the face of the person, and for fun, add the radius max around the image. Right? And let's make this proper, so let's do height 250, so it's a proper, nice profile image. Okay? So our profile image is now 8 kilobytes. So we went from 570 of a big image to 8 kilobytes. Why is this important? Most of the time when I speak to web developers, they download the image, the full-size image, or an optimized version of the image to the browser, and then they see us as the hell out of it. Huh? Oh, yeah, sorry. And why is that bad? Because you still downloaded the 570 kilobyte image, or whatever the image size was, and you just shrink it, but you still use the 570 kilobytes. This way, what you do, you get something generated server-side, and what gets sent to you is the already optimized and shrink-down version of the image, right? And this is just a few of the capabilities that we do here, but it's hopefully demonstrating also what happens inside the JAMstack application. And this is another classic example of using someone else's API to achieve what you want. All you need to do is use, and in the Next application I used our Vue.js SDK to apply these transformations to my images inside the pages where I needed it. Where I needed to zoom in on the face, I have the image component to crop around the face. When I open the page, I just say shrink the image down to 300 pixels, right? So by using this service, I get a, where is it? The images show up as I want. Now obviously you see that it's working with human faces. Chewbacca is not really one of those examples, but most of the time it does exactly what I wanted. It zooms in on the face, and if I click on it, it then shows me the entire image. So these are in fact exactly the same images, but with different transformation or different options passed into it. So
the last one, what size is it?
this one, when they stand, I think it's 300 maybe 300
The same
pixels.
open example that you gave. The last one that you gave,
The woman. Oh, you mean
just
the
to see the size.
that one? 7.8 kilobytes.
Sounds.
Yes.
When you use the API, you can still do that even if this is clouded. How do you use the API images?
So I can show you. So in the code you have no pages, characters. So index. Okay, so there's the cloud image. So this is the Vue.js SDK component. See here the image. You pass in the identifier of the image, and you just pass in the options. So this is how what you see there is going to generate that URL. Okay, so you see width, height, crop a thumbnail, find gravity face, fetch format, f-auto, quality auto, secure true. We always give an HTTPS. Okay, so this is here, and when I list the character, it's the same component but with different parameters. 400 by 500, f-auto. Instead of a thumbnail, I do a crop fit. So I want to fit the image into the 400 by 500.
It's like server-side CSS?
Good. Better than Dropbox cloud-based Photoshop, I suppose.
Did you upload the images in advance?
So what I did, yes. So the way this all works is that in my API, so I have the image in Cloudinary. I have, where did that headless CMS thing go? In the headless CMS, I just have the reference of that image, right? And that's what I pass into the Cloudinary image component, and then it knows where to get that image from and generates that entire URL for me. Okay, so what we're going to do is deploy this real quick. So we have, so what I've done, also to save some time, is that I have this meetup test repository created. So this is the source code of the application that you saw. And I'm going to go to Netlify, which is the deployment platform that we're going to use, and we are going to deploy this together, right? So now I have my application ready, and I want to see it on the internet. So I go, new site from Git, right? So obviously I'm registered to Netlify, it's just email address, password, and then you say, okay, I want to do GitHub, because that's where my project is. Uh-oh. That's not, wait, what? Wait, what did I do? No. Okay, GitHub. Yes. We've been through that, GitHub. Really? This is so typical, isn't it? Why is this? Okay. So you then go ahead and select a repository. So it's not seen, so it says, can't you see your repo here? Configure the Netlify app on GitHub. So I'm going to use this GitHub account, and hopefully you don't see the password, because once I typed it in an input box. And now it says, so there's two ways that Netlify can integrate with GitHub. One is that you tell Netlify, here's my GitHub account, take it all. And I was like, yeah, let's not do that. I'm very selective, so every time I need to deploy something, I need to select it. So this is the repository that I want to select. Hit save, And hopefully this is now going to work, so it should appear, okay, here it is, right? So this is the repository. Now, what I want you to notice is that you can select a branch that you want to deploy from. There's only the master branch, that's what we're going to do. It asks for a build command. So what is the build command? The build command, if I just do npm run here, there's this thing called, it's generate. Yes, I'm looking at you because you would do something similar. So generate, and I can show you, is going to create this dist folder. And inside this dist folder, notice I have characters, and for each character there's a subfolder, and inside that there's a static HTML file containing all the CSS and all the HTML that is relevant for that particular character. So Nuxt generate pre-builds the entire site for me. Okay? So what do I need to tell Netlify? That every time when there's a git commit, execute Nuxt generate, and publish directory is going to be dist. Show advanced allows you to add environment variables, which I don't think I need at this time, and then you click on deploy site. So what's going to happen is that you can actually follow that by going on to deploys, and there is something building. Okay? So what Netlify is doing, it clones your repository, installs all the dependencies for you, executes the Nuxt generate command, which in turn generates all the static HTML pages that you have, and is going to just push that out to their global CDN network. And therefore, in about a minute or two, fingers crossed, I will be able to go to that URL and see exactly the same application. Okay? So we're going to wait now for a bit. There was something else that I wanted to tell you, but I can't remember what it was. So you can follow what's happening, and then what I want to see, you see, so executing user command, Nuxt generate. So this is going to generate the static pages. There's a deprecation warning. You can ignore that if you work with Nuxt, that's fine. And at some point in time, Netlify should say site is live, or give me a massive error message. It's either two.
The same process can be done for React, Angular.
These are static site generators. So
yeah.
Remember from this list, actually all of these are compatible with Netlify, with Amplify, with we're actually Site now. So Next.js is a Site product. So Site now is a deployment platform, and Next.js is a React-based static site generator that Site created. So they work hand in hand, but you can make that work with other static site generators or with other deployment platforms. So you can mix and match these. Okay, so compiled successfully, compiling server. Something's happening, hopefully. And so there's a lot of things Netlify also does. So they have a CMS. So if you don't want to use an API-based CMS, you can use the Netlify CMS, which is a Git-based CMS. So you can manage your content using Netlify. You can also do, there's another product, they have Netlify functions. Those are serverless functions where you want server-side code execution to happen. You can have it via Netlify functions. They have Netlify identity. If you want to have authentication for your app, again, you can have it via Netlify. So it's like a pretty full platform. Okay, so green, generated. You see it generates all these pages. If you're familiar with MongoDB, you can see that this is a MongoDB ID via the headless CMS. And site is live. Okay, so that means that if I now go back here and go to youthful something, then this is my application now deployed, available on a CDN globally to everyone out there. Done, okay? Thank you. Furthermore, you can also do, there's a setting in here that says set up a domain, and you just say starwars.com, obviously don't, but you can set up your own domain. So the other thing that I want to show you is, this is our application, and now...
Is it free?
This one, Netlify? Yeah. I mean, they have some paid...
No.
Huh?
Custom domain is not free.
It is.
There are other hosts.
Because I have my own domain, yeah, that's
Okay.
free.
Some of them are
Really?
It is, yeah. So what we do here is, we just developed a new component, done. save it, and what we do is, okay, we do git status, and we're like, oh, we have a modified something. Okay, so we do git commit, new component, and git push, right? This is what you would do, right? We just developed something. And what I want you to notice is that if I go back to Netlify now, under deploys, look at that, there's something being enqueued, and there is the new component message. So Netlify now knows that I did a git push, and it's going to redeploy my site with my changes, okay? So if we refresh this, hopefully it's now building. If you want to follow that, it's going to go through the build process again, a lot faster because it has some stuff cached already, right? So it doesn't need to do everything. What it needs to do is rerun the next generate command, and hopefully in a few minutes we will see that there's going to be a new feature, a new component added to this application if I refresh that, okay? While that's happening, one last thing that I will show you is this Firebase example, which is npm run dev as well. But I need to, oh, that's not funny. Sorry, it's 5 more minutes and I'm done. So that's deploying locally, that's deploying on Netlify, everything's deploying. Let's see, where is it? Where are you? Compiling something. This is ready, so let's take a look at this. So what you have here is a bit more complex example. Still Star Wars, obviously. But what I want you to realize here is that I have now something that you would consider to be super dynamic and requires servers, authentication. This is still JAMstack. I don't have a server, right? This is still without an actual server. So what you can do here is you can take a look at the, let's do it here. Take a look at the characters. Again, there's the list. Again, zoom in on the face, etc., etc. You can click on it, and you can, different style, but the same data. And there's this thing called all favorites. So there are no favorites. Login to see. Most like Star Wars characters. Okay, so let's log in. I think that's the right password. So when I'm logged in, now I have this menu called My Favorites. And if I actually go and open a character, now I can favorite the character itself. And what I want you to realize is that all favorites, if I do it this way, so if I now go and favorite this character, there's going to be an overall count that is going to update, and in a few seconds, fingers crossed, I should get most liked characters updated. Now if you would log in, and more people would log in, and they would keep on favoriting characters, there would eventually be a list that would build up, right? How does that work? Because this requires a lot of server-side code execution, and you're right, the one thing that I have is Firebase function. So there's this very simple, relatively simple function that I have, and the essence is this. So if inside my data set, someone is unfavoriting a character, then there is overall favorite count, which I'm decreasing. If someone favorites a character, it gets increased, okay? And this function is deployed as a Google Cloud function, so it accesses my Firebase instance, and I can still get away by not having a server, yet having something that is truly, truly interactive. Okay?
But this one you can't do with the headless CMS.
You could. I mean, if the headless CMS has, so for example, in GraphQL you have subscriptions, which means that you can subscribe to the data and your stuff would refresh like this. In the same way how Firebase does this for me. So I could use Netlify, you could use any serverless function. So with serverless functions, Netlify functions, AWS, Lambda functions, Azure functions, you deploy them and you get an access URL to the function itself, which then...
Function without the Firebase database?
No, here I have Firebase database and the Firebase function, but there's, will you show that?
I won't show Firebase, I will show
Not so, but you will find,
I will show serverless functions, yeah.
You will show a serverless function. I don't want to hold up his time, but one more thing that I wanted to see is our deployment, right? So we did a git push. Hopefully that's now blah, 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 blah. Okay, site is live. Whereas, was it this one? Refresh. New component I can click on it. I have just deployed this, right? So I can now filter my characters, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? But we added some functionality. Git commit, git push. I didn't do anything, and now my site is again live. So, just to wrap up, sorry, I speak a lot. Mandatory slide. I was told by HR lady there. She's not listening. Okay. We are hiring. Cloudinary is hiring. So cloudinary.com/jobs if you want to work with images, videos, media, optimization, media assets, yada yada yada. Please check that. If you wouldn't like to work for us, we have this program called the Media Developer Experts Program, which is somewhat similar to the Google Developer Expert Program. So if you work a lot with images, media, and other stuff, and you want Cloudinary to sponsor maybe your meetup, or send you to conferences, or give you lots of stickers, and allow you to write blog posts, then you can join this program as well, and then we can talk about how you can become this media developer experts. Think about this as a career enhancement, advancement program as well, especially if you're like a contractor and stuff. One of the key requirements is that you work a lot with images, performance, media, videos, that kind of stuff. You see these stickers everywhere, JAMstack.training. That's also a website that I've run. There are currently 5 free video courses up there about the JAMstack. The first one is Introduction to the JAMstack. There's one on authentication in the JAMstack. There's one about creating an e-commerce application using the JAMstack and Gatsby. Create your own blog using 11t. And another one, I don't know. So feel free to register. It's absolutely free, and check that out if you want to learn more about the JAMstack. And with that, Toda, thank you very much.